what happened, but you had to leave before the end, before that question was asked. So I turned on the BBC in London to find out what did she say before I did my press conference. I couldn't hear the BBC in the Irish Embassy in London. Radio Caroline blotted it out. So I went into a press conference, not knowing this had happened, and all the journalists knew it and were turning on me. I gave the 7 worst interviews on radio and television of my life as a result. And then I went home, pretty miserable. What had happened? Then I thought about it and said, gosh, we have an opportunity. She's given the impression of being so negative that people will be upset with her. Her ministers will be upset. Her civil servants will be upset. People in Parliament will be upset. We have a moral advantage. If we play this right, we can get her to come back and make concessions. And we had a word with the American president to encourage her in that regard. And it happened. She came to Dublin for a European Council about 10 days later. And we had a private talk, and she started saying, Garrett, what did I do wrong? It was a wonderful moment. and it was totally misinterpreted. It was a wee bit of a misinterpretation. For 20th of January, new proposals come from her, which advanced things, but we got stuck. So what seemed like a disaster wasn't a disaster at all. But I had to wait 24 hours, or 12 hours anyway, before I realized we had the advantage now. And we got the agreement. But the agreement was, of course, hugely misinterpreted, you know, because the unionists thought we were trying to take over Northern Ireland. Well, I was concerned that we would have a sufficient role inside Northern Ireland for nationalists to rally to this agreement sufficiently to shift the balance within the system so that Sinn Féin would have to rethink their position. That's what happened. And what convinced nationalist opinion? The unionist outrage was such that nationalists thought it must be a good agreement. Nobody even looked at the agreement was in it. And in fact, I have to say, the British weren't great at implementing some of the security clauses either. But it was great enthusiasm on the nationalist side because of the unionist reaction. And even today, unions don't understand how helpful they were by coming on the streets in such large numbers. That shifted nationalist opinion, that shifted Sinn Féin, and the whole process, the peace process started as a result. Politics is more complicated than you think from outside.
Any other questions?
Yeah?
Would you agree that the 1981 hunger strikes were a turning point in nationalist politics?
Yes, the hunger strikes were a turning point, and for me were a turning point. I had always felt that we should settle this issue as Irishmen together, whether unionists or nationalists, calling in the British to handle the matter and impose their will on Irish people, whatever their profession, didn't seem to be a great idea. That had been my view all my life. I have been writing articles on all that since 1948, disagreeing with government policy for all those decades, before I ever got into politics. But I think that. But after the hunger strikes, I was out of office then in '82 for 9 months, came back in the end of the year, and the great thing about being in opposition is you have time to think. In government, very little time to think. And reflecting on it, I realized that if I persisted in seeking a solution between two sides internally, and failing, because there was no movement on the union side, the situation could get to the point where, even with violence continuing, Sinn Féin might still get a majority in the internationalist community, in which event we could be faced conceivably with civil war. And that was the advice I was getting. Because if Sinn Féin had a majority of national support, while still being violent, they might be tempted to raise the level of violence, which they'd never raised to a civil war level, but always pulled back at each point. And therefore, if I persisted in taking my rather naive view, we should deal with the unionists and not bring in the British big guns, I could lead to a far worse situation. So I had to reverse my commitment, my views, and decide, no, the time has come, we'll have to talk to the British. We'll have to move in some way to get movement in the situation. And so my whole position was radically changed, but I was trying to have to say it in that way. Not perhaps what people intended, but that's a big terror of me. And so it did lead, the increase in support for Sinn Féin meant that the southern state, concerned for its security and security of the island as a whole, was forced to shift policy and to put the pressure on Britain to change policy, which was done to a sufficient extent that unionists reacted sufficiently negatively for Sinn Féin to react the way we wanted. And the process began. But it was a seminal thing. Without the hunger strikes, I don't think there would have been the increase in Sinn Féin support in the 80s, which really did force a change of policy. to be quite frank about it.
Thanks, maybe now we have a question from Thornhill. Okay.
Northern Ireland politicians have received a lot of bad press recently from Southern politicians in particular. Now, in light of the Liam Muller and more recently the Micheál Martin affair, do you think Southern politicians are in any position to criticise Northern politicians?
It's very unwise of any politician to criticize any other politician. In any other country or at home, it can come back and hit you. Anything you say, there's always a true quote may come back of some kind. And probably enough deficiencies in our system. But I have to say that there is a problem now of understanding. I think that the way events have turned out, the length of time the peace process hasn't reached a conclusion, has certainly disillusioned people in the South. And I think there's a bigger division between national South and North now than in the past, which is very worrying. Because it's very difficult for Southern politicians to understand the way Northern politics has gone. In the South, Sinn Féin gets support in certain areas near the border in North Kerry, which are traditionally Republican, and they get support also in working class disadvantaged areas of Dublin, where the other parties have failed to do the job of looking after people properly, in my view, and we're left a vacuum. And we can understand that. What is difficult for people in the South to understand is the shift in opinion on the national side in Northern Ireland itself, and indeed on the Unionist side. If you're not in this situation, it's very hard to understand why people move to more extreme positions when you're getting progress towards peace. Logically, to think, well, things are getting a bit better, people are not being murdered by the same way on either side, and progress being made, you expect people to get more moderate. I can understand the complex motivations that lead to this changing, but most people don't understand that. They see it as irrational. And that is meant, I think, and there's no public evidence of this, but I think anybody in the South will tell you the same thing, that there is a bigger gulf between Northern and Southern nationalists than there was at this time. And that's worrying, because a gulf between anybody else is worrying, whoever it is, nationalist unions, or within nationalism, or within unionism, it doesn't help. So there are problems now. If, after this election, the move that Jerry Adams has sought takes place, and there is progress towards a solution. And I did think Peter Robinson's speech yesterday, which was a very serious modification of what Mr. Paisley had said, did open the way to movement later in the year. If that happens, we may come out the far end all right. But at the moment, it's a bad moment at this stage because of the incomprehension or difficulty of comprehending which people in the South have, which prevents them North. And of course, we have been divided by a lot over a long period of time. There was always divisions. Daniel O'Connell couldn't come north. Wasn't that come north 170 years ago, long before partition? So there are always north-south divisions in the past. Nothing new about that. But they are more acute at present because they are within nationalism as also between nationalism and unionism.
Maybe there's a question from Limerick Christer, before I look at the back here.
Yes, do you think the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists vote will hold in the next election?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Do you think the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists vote will hold in the next election?
I don't know. It's a great mistake. Well, it's a mistake anyway to forecast elections in any circumstances. For a Southerner to forecast a Northern election when there's a certain incomprehension in any event between us and the North would be very sensible. I haven't debated it, I don't know. Last time I put a bet in an election, I lost. I never do it again. That's not money. I never bet in my life after 1949, except once on a by-election that Fine Gael would win and we lost it. I never bet again after that.
Question for Limerick Christer here in the middle.
Do you foresee a united Ireland in our lifetime, and if so, how will it come about?
Well, it might be in your lifetime, it won't be in mine. It's not impossible, but a lot would need to happen. And unfortunately, your politics are so political, nobody ever discusses economics. Now, Northern Ireland has now become, it was always dependent on Britain to a degree. It never could pay the full imperial contribution way back in 2030. But the dependence of Northern Ireland on Britain is now huge. I haven't done a recent analysis of it, but I'm told it's possibly 5 to 6 billion a year. It looks as if the transfers from Britain through the social welfare system add up to about 20% of your national output. The result is that we have progressed very rapidly economically. I did the first study ever of North-South economies. You'll find it in Studies, Winter 1956 journal, and I was able to show, for the first time there was a national account for Northern Ireland, that at that time, Northern Ireland produced 37.5% of the total output of this island. What's the figure today? I calculated 2 years ago for another book I was writing, and I was so astonished at the figure, I rang the chief statistician at Stormont and told him the figure. Would that be right? Oh, that's right, 23.5%. There's a huge change that's taken place. The South's grown so rapidly, the North so slowly, that you now account for less than a quarter of output here, as against almost 40% 50 years ago. And the degree of dependence on Northern Ireland is such, and dependence on the public sector is such, that it's only one comparison in Europe now today, East Germany. The dependence of East Germany and West Germany, which 15 years of unity haven't resolved. And there's a huge problem. In fact, the whole German economy, well, the ratio of East Germany to West Germany is about 1 to 3 or something, whereas in Northern Ireland to Britain is much less, so the British don't realise this or notice it. But it's a huge degree of dependence. Now, your living standards are still slightly higher than ours. That's because of the huge transfers from Britain. But your output per head is 20% less than ours at this stage. And that's the real Northern Ireland problem. When you stop fighting about politics, you've got to get down to economics. If I had been David Trimble, and I was negotiating half the unions, I would have insisted that I will not sign any damned agreement unless we get the same right to a 12.5% corporation tax as the South has. So you complete. Instead, the political attitude of unions and politicians was, we want to stay close to Britain, we mustn't change anything, we mustn't get nearer to the South, even in tax rates. And he was absolutely opposed to any such idea. So if your politicians are totally opposed to anything beneficial to your own area, you have a bit of a problem economically. And as nobody even mentions this or talks about it, or is never referred to anywhere in the papers, I worry about the North of Ireland. And of course there's no way in which the South's going to take over 5 or 6 billion of a subsidy. It's all right the British fork it out, they're 15 times bigger than us. But it'd be the equivalent, the British paying 15 times as much. So, I mean, if this became an issue, who's going to vote from the South if they're told to increase taxes by that huge amount to pay for it? So we really have to deal with this political problem, which is soluble at this stage, and then address the economic problem and try to build up the Northern economy. When I wrote my first book on Northern Ireland in 1972, I then said that I believed that in 25 years, North and South could catch up on Britain economically. We're both further behind that time. And then there would be no subsidies involved, so that although you'd have the political problem, at least wouldn't be an economic obstacle for Irish unity. But now the economic obstacle is hugely increased. And maybe we'll someday solve the political problem. Maybe people in Northern Ireland will want to join the South at some stage, I don't know. My grandchildren's time perhaps. But it won't happen if you don't solve the economic problem. And you are now, like East Germany, you're the 2 economic basket cases of Europe. And it'd be a help if somebody occasionally mentioned the fact, or addressed it, or thought about it. And that's the job for your generation. Forget about United Ireland. Anyway, get on with whether you want United Ireland or don't. You should want to be prosperous. You should want to catch up with, not be lagging behind the South. So that's the task for your generation to address. And then if you or your children or grandchildren want to change the situation, so be it when it happens. But that's a long way down the line at this stage.
Another question from the college up here.
Why was it not possible to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement in the 1980s, given that Seamus Mallon presented Sunningdale for slow learners?
Well, we did negotiate it. The Sunningdale. It's exactly the same agreement, power sharing in Northern Ireland, Council of Ireland. But the details are different. The 2 elements are there exactly as the Friday Agreement. But at that time, the unionists were not prepared to accept it. And it was brought down by the workers' strike and by having a weak British government unsure of itself. You see, the problem wasn't helped by the fact that Harold Wilson came to power at that point. And he was not a strong, at that stage, maybe early on, his first period of government, he was not a strong leader. And his first thought was, let's look at all possible solutions, including withdrawal.